Welcome to Dory Cote on Shamanism, a weekly podcast that explores one theme in shamanism throughout each month. Get comfortable, have a seat, and let's get started.
Welcome to this week's podcast, where we continue our conversation about tribes. And this week in particular, we're going to be talking about how do tribes form?
Dory, would you just refresh our memories from the last two and some of the major elements around tribe formation that we've already touched on and bring this back for us?
Sure. Tribes form around a common cause for the most part. And, you know, if we again go back in history to our ancestors created tribe for the most part for the sake of survival, ceremony, celebration, and shared purpose of some kind. So, for instance, those tribal peoples might have been family, and we talked about how families used to be so much more cohesive. You don't have to go that far back in history before, young people left home and pursued their own purpose and live far away and have their children far away. So now the grandparents are across the country. Cousins and aunts and uncles are scattered all over the place. And so, that sense of tribal family is not as common today as it was even back in the 1930s and 40s. And then people come together and create tribe around other common goals, even if they're not in any way related or even know each other, culturally or through any kind of religious affiliation. And those are things like, okay, again, war. I hate to keep talking about soldiers and war, but unfortunately, what has spurned a lot of tribal activity in more modern day culture has been war or terrorist attacks and things of that nature. You only have to go back to World War II in the United States. After Pearl Harbor, everybody who was a citizen of the United States was pretty much on board with, we are all now working for the war effort. The quote, the men went off to battle, the women stayed home and they became Rosie the Riveter. They figured out how to carry on with the Industrial Revolution to create the goods that were needed in order to supply the war effort. They cut back on what they were consuming in order to support the war effort. And everybody had a common goal. It would have been highly unusual to meet somebody on the street in the United States during World War II and have them not be engaged in some way in knowing that we as a country, our survival, our purpose was to win the war. When the war was over, that tribal community dispersed and the United States became, again, a bunch of individual states, individual communities, and that tribal effort ended. The same happened after 9/11, and that's not all that long ago. People came together with a very common purpose, and that was to help the people within the New York, Washington, D.C., and Pennsylvania areas that had been the most heavily impacted. And everybody's focus in the United States was on, what do we do? People came from all over the country to go to New York or to go to Washington, D.C., or to go to the site where the plane crashed in Pennsylvania to help the people, to sift through the rubble, to find the remains, to support the people who had been displaced as a result, to help with the trauma that people were experiencing. So again, a tribe got formed, even though people were from all over the nation coming together to, again, serve a common goal. And it was through that tribal connection that, decisions got made to go to war without really thinking it through. We were so affronted, we were so offended, we were so frightened by what happened that the instinct to invade Afghanistan did not get questioned very heavily. And so as a tribe, we came together and we went to war. And, there's a situation where tribe came together initially for the survival of the people who had been impacted, and then moved in another direction of, not thinking very clearly and moving in a direction of actually doing harm. Not a positive purpose for a tribe. So tribes can exist to do good. Tribes can also exist to create harm. And it's so another reason to be so conscious about what is your tribe's purpose, and do you want to sign up for being a part of that tribe or not? And if you don't want to be a part of that tribe, then it's important for you to take yourself out of that tribal community.
So there's got to be a purpose larger than yourself that your participation is in service of.
Yes.
And then the tribe has an identity. All the little American flags came out on the cars.
Yes.
And everywhere else right after 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
And we're still up as we went to war. And then slowly, as we began to realize that might not have been great, the American flags started disappearing again.
That's right. That's true. And I like the thing about the symbology, because symbols and ceremonies emerge from those kinds of events. Remember the tie a yellow ribbon around the old oak tree?
Mm-hmm.
Now, during the Vietnam War, everybody had yellow ribbons around their trees. It was a way of creating symbology for, I am behind the war effort. I really want to bring our soldiers home. Mm-hmm. Let's bring our soldiers home. And, in 9/11, what happened was the symbology of, the beams and the concrete from the buildings that had been destroyed, and everybody being in a frenzy of wanting to have a piece of the beams or a piece of the stone as somehow an emblematic way of connecting with being in support of all of the people who had been damaged, but also being in support of how wrong what happened was. And
also being in support of something larger than yourself.
Exactly.
The knock on wood came from early Christians carrying wood that they believed were pieces of the cross.
That's right. Yes.
Some wars are created to protect our tribe. How might this be a deterrent to world peace?
Yeah, so there is a big musing that I've been going through, because as you can see, I have been talking here about how sometimes we create tribe for the sake of making war or supporting a war effort. And how does that work against the greater goal that so many of us have, which is supporting an effort of world peace? So again, I go back to what I said in the prior the conversation of the prior question, which is, we really need to take responsibility for what tribe we're signing up for. And what is the goal of that tribe? And is it an appropriate purpose? You know, like what happened after 9/11, and how we, out of our own fear, out of our own anger and despair about what happened in that event, without really stepping back and taking a vote of everybody in the tribe, we all unconsciously signed up for a war that became a disaster for us and for the Afghan people and for and so many other peoples. And you know what ended up spilling into Iraq, and so if you really are focused on creating world peace, then find a group of people who you can create tribe with, who are wholeheartedly committed in all of their actions to participating in creating an atmosphere of world peace. And you can't create an atmosphere of world peace when people are fighting amongst themselves. So a true tribal community is a community where everybody is working together. And, you know, like the people who were hunkered down in the tunnels during the invasion of Europe, and where bombs were falling, those people, they were huddled together in the tunnels, and they had to work together to survive. They shared the resources they had. And so if you want to create world peace, you have to huddle together with the people who have that same goal, share responsibility, and live from a place of peace, not from a place of fighting, bickering, throwing things, you know, screaming at other people that they're not right and you're right. And peace can't happen if you're warring. You have to be coming from a place of peace and harmony. And so pay attention to what tribe you sign on to be a member of, because we all end up being parts of a tribe that we occasionally would far prefer we had not been a member of.
What are some of the evolutionary moments in human history that have created disconnection from tribe?
Well, that was a part of Sebastian Junger's book that I was really quite fascinated by, and his talking about how the advent of agriculture actually was one of the first ways in which the concept of tribe became broken down in our history. And it really was about, again, rather than the individuals within a community being responsible for foraging and finding food out in the wild, or planting their own individual small garden of corn or potatoes or whatever it is they were growing, to a culture where the responsibility for growing food was shifted to farmers who are growing food for the masses. And as a result, now we no longer have communities of people or families of people who were responsible for feeding themselves and, you know, taking care of the garden, and what are we going to plant this year, and where is it going to go, and how are we going to put that food up so that we can make it through the winter, and you know, how many pigs do we need to have this year? Or how many chickens do we need in order to have eggs year round? And how many chickens do we need to butcher to make it through the winter, and so on. That was really life not all that long ago. If we go back to the beginning of the 1900s or even later than that, that is how the typical family lived in our country.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of that got moved to mass agriculture. And that was the beginning of the falling apart of the family as tribe, and as he postulates. And the other that he talks about, which I find equally fascinating, is the Industrial Revolution. And, the creation of mass goods in an industrial environment where, people left the family to go to work someplace outside of home for the sake of making money, to come home and use that money to buy food and goods from a central distribution place. And ultimately what that meant was no longer using the natural resources and no longer participating as a family to create shelter and food and ceremony for themselves. It's pretty interesting.
That is interesting.
I agree with most of it. If you look at it from a historical perspective, it is really how, the larger family. I'm not just talking about the mom and dad and children as family. I'm talking about the larger family, the more like what you were talking about, the clan, all of the aunts and uncles and cousins and nieces and nephews and siblings who are in a same geographic area and work together to, mow grandpa's lawn because grandpa can't mow it anymore, or put some extra peas in the garden because Aunt Mabel has to have surgery this summer and she can't grow her own peas. Those kinds of ways are the ways that those families were tribal. And since the agricultural revolution and the industrial revolution, that has become less and less true.
And that's small family disasters allowing people to come to contribute for something that's a cause larger than themselves to serve.
Exactly.
And now we have services that families buy to take care of their people in need.
Exactly. It's, it's the difference between elder people going to nursing homes rather than being taken in by family members and cared for until they die.
The in-law suite is a thing of past. Yeah.
Exactly. I think back even in my own life to my maternal grandmother, who lived in that era to be quite old, actually. And for a big part of her life, she lived with one of my aunts who took care of her, supported her, and then that aunt became incapable of doing that. And so my grandmother went to live with all of her children one at a time. She went to this child, of course they're all adults and had their own family. She went to this child for 3 months, and then she would move to another one for 3 months. Then she would come to our house for 3 months, and she would go to somebody else's house for 3 months. She did that until the day she died at somebody's house. And, that's unheard of, pretty much unheard of in today's world. Does it happen? Yes, but not in the ways that it did out of necessity, in the earlier 1900s. Now we have nursing homes, and that's where people go. And that is not tribe. That is the absolute opposite of tribe. That takes people, isolates them from their tribe. And for the most part, in nursing homes, tribes don't get created.
There are, however, some over 55 communities or condo associations that end up becoming that way, that create tribes like Willow Grove in Brunswick, where you just have this vibrant community where people are living together in an association. They have a name, they've got a symbol, and they do for each other.
Yes, and that's a beautiful thing. And that's, my hope is that over time, those kinds of communities will begin to crop up more and more, and become tribes for one another, where, your next door neighbor, is having knee replacement surgery. And so everybody in the community comes together and makes sure that there's food there to take care of him or her, and that someone goes and picks them up at the hospital and makes sure they get out of the car okay. And, all of that, that's tribe.
Is there anything else you would like to add about how tribes form?
Not at this time. No, I feel like we've covered this quite well.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Dory Cote on shamanism. We'd love to hear your thoughts, stories, reactions, and questions. Come on over to dorycote.com and join the conversation. And tune in next week for more on this subject, or next month for a new subject. You can subscribe to this podcast in iTunes or sign up on dorycote.com to receive notices when the podcasts are posted. That's Dory, D-O-R-Y, and Cote, C-O-T-E.com. Drumming and rattling by Dory Cote and Terry Morgan. Technical assistance and audio production by JillHackett.com. And this is Susan Savelle, wishing you many blessings in your life. We hope to have you join us next time.